Today, the Health Professions Council of South Africa continues to push for some sort of historical accountability over Wouter Basson, the so-called Dr. Death's involvement in the apartheid government's secret chemical and biological warfare program called Project Coast. But as News 24's Cape Town journalist Tammy Petersen gives us the very latest, the northern suburbs-based cardiologist has, at the age of 74, turned to the courts to get the HPCSA off his back once and for all.
So Dr. Basson argues in his court papers in the High Court application for his permanent stay of proceedings that this new bid by the HPCSA is nothing but persecution based on reasons and motivations other than protecting patients or members of the public. He still maintains that the HPCSA's inquiry relates to his conduct in his capacity as a soldier in the Defence Force, not as a medical doctor. So according to him, the purpose is not a bid to protect the public, considering that he has an unblemished record as a medical practitioner.
Catch our full update next. Later in the show, a former Transnet employee is wanted for the hit on a Vereniging engineer whose company blew the whistle on procurement corruption. And finally, disgraced singer R. Kelly claims he's in danger behind bars.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
We'd love to hear from you. Send us a short voice note of around 20 seconds with your questions, perhaps thoughts on this episode, to our official The Lead WhatsApp line. It's on 072 562 3179, 072 562 3179. You can also mail us thelead@24.com. I'm your host, Graham Robenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. It's an open secret that he continues practicing as a professional cardiologist in Cape Town's northern suburbs. But the Health Professions Council of South Africa today refuses to accept Wouter Basson's current position because of his highly controversial past activities in the apartheid-era South African Defence Force. The 74-year-old has since the 90s struggled to shake the title of so-called Dr. Death following his involvement in Old Pretoria's secretive Project Coast, the chemical and biological warfare program that Basson headed up through the late 70s, 80s and 90s. Now, although initially criminally acquitted, the HPCSA has been gunning for Basson since, and now he claims he's had enough. Our News 24 journalist on the story with the very latest update is Tammy Petersen. She joins me now in our Cape Town studios. Tammy, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Welcome to your debut edition of The Lead.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate it. Look, we're not going to get to every single aspect of this story today, right? We know in 2002, for example, Mr. Basson was acquitted of 61 charges, including murder in relation to this project. But by 2013, the HPCSA had found Basson guilty. Tammy, what did they find him guilty of?
So Dr. Basson was found guilty of unprofessional conduct during his time as the head of Project Coast, which was the apartheid government's secret chemical and biological warfare program. But his main argument in response to the charges had been that he had been acting as a soldier and, in the Defence Force and not as a medical doctor. But the professional conduct inquiry found that Dr. Basson contravened international protocols and conventions. And according to them, he confused ethics of a doctor with that of a soldier while discharging his duties. They argued that a doctor can't rely on military orders to escape the consequences of his duties. So the chairperson of the inquiry at the time, he was Professor Yanni Hichu. He had quoted from the physician's oath, which reads that practitioners will maintain the utmost respect for human life from time of conception, even under threat, and would not use their medical knowledge contrary to the laws of humanity. The HPCSA at the time, when they actually, obviously won that case, they had hailed the verdict as a watershed moment. But obviously their joy and victory was not, it didn't last very long.
But of course, they saw it as a big win, especially after the fact that that the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that those proceedings and thus the criminal proceedings that followed ended in Mr. Basson being sort of acquitted here. And for those wondering what the CBW program was, during apartheid, Pretoria held that this was a defensive program to find out and get further knowledge about how South Africa could protect itself, as it was involved, of course, in the border war with Angola, in case of any sort of chemical warfare being waged against South Africa at the time. But there were, of course, these allegations that the program was used offensively, and some of the main sort of allegations here is that Mr. Basson, as a former Special Forces Army brigadier, and that during this program he had developed lethal chemical and biological weapons that had targeted the liberation movement in this country. So that's been something that's been hanging over his head for the longest time. Dr. Basson, he was then successful in appealing the HPCSA's outcome. What was that outcome, Tammy? And that was around 2019, right?
The High Court eventually found that members of that committee that found him guilty had been biased, as two of them had actually been members of the SA Medical Association and the Rural Doctors Association of South Africa, which had advocated for Dr. Basson's removal from the medical register. So they were seen as not being unbiased members of that panel. And eventually in 2019, the committee was ordered to recuse the two members, and then it was sort of back to square one.
And now we're talking, pushing on to past 30 years, moving on to, nearly 40 years since these alleged activities had taken place. And since then, Dr. Basson, it's an open secret, Tammy, that he's been practicing as a fairly well-known, established cardiologist, especially here in the mother city, right?
Yeah, so Dr. Basson has actually been practicing full-time as a cardiologist in Pretoria first since 1995. And then that was after he left the South African National Defence Force. That's obviously the post-apartheid one. The apartheid era one was the SADF, which was South African Defence Force. And then post-94, we became South African National Defence Force. He has since moved to Cape Town after starting practicing cardiology in Pretoria, and he now practices from Mediclinic in Durbanville.
Sure. And also an interesting tidbit, and I didn't really know this, is that Nelson Mandela, once he had become president, had actually retained, as to what Tammy was just telling us, actually retained Basson within the South African National Defence Force at the time to try and keep closer control over him, because he had been traveling and there was concerns over that, and various other countries had raised the alarm in that regard because of the allegations at the time. But it always comes down, Tammy, to the HPCSA. They've not stopped gunning for Basson after all this time. They've been trying to institute a disciplinary inquiry yet again, or disciplinary proceedings yet again, after the previous one had thus been sort of, annulled and appeals had ruled in his favor, right?
Yeah. So according to Dr. Basson, his evaluation of the charges is that it do not relate to his conduct in terms of a doctor-patient relationship. He points out that the charges deal with allegations of research, manufacturing, and distribution of irritating and incapacitating substances for crowd control, the alleged ability to provide capsules to specialized defense force operators to enable them to commit suicide if they're captured, and if they choose to do so. And for this, he says there is no allegation of any harm being caused to anyone. But essentially, though, what these new proceedings are is the HPCSA versus Wouter Basson, take two, 25 years since the initial complaints were laid.
What has he now stated on record? He's sort of saying, hey, I can't remember everything from around 40 years ago. Right, Tammy?
So Dr. Basson argues in his court papers, in the High Court application for his permanent stay of proceedings, that this new bid by the HPCSA is nothing but persecution based on reasons and motivations other than protecting patients or members of the public. He still maintains that the HPCSA's inquiry relates to his conduct in his capacity as a soldier in the Defence Force, not as a medical doctor. So according to him, the purpose is not a bid to protect the public, considering that he has an unblemished record as a medical practitioner. The crux of his court application is that there has been an unreasonable delay in the HPCSA's action against him. But according to Pranitha Padayachi, she's the HPCSA's head of Department for Legal and Regulatory Affairs. She says that their attorneys have been corresponding between 2020 and 2024 regarding the recusal of the two members of the committee, as well as the convening of a new committee to deal with this inquiry. So according to the HPCSA's responding papers, Dr. Basson himself has actually also contributed to the delay, as he had been waiting for confirmation from the state attorney, on behalf of the Department of Defense, that his legal costs will be covered. So it will be covered by the state. Therefore, we will be paying for the HPCSA's take two of Wouter Basson.
Sure. Okay. And I thought it would also be very interesting at this time just to add a sort of very interesting sort of historical nugget, is that back in 2013, when the HPCSA had found him thus guilty, we heard from, and this was in fact News 24 reporting at the time, we heard from a Mamelodi resident, Lizzie Sofulo, and she had told our reporters at the time that her husband and 3 other anti-apartheid activists were in fact drugged and tortured by security policemen back in 1987, and that according to her, the bodies were blown up in the former homeland of Bapudatswana. And carries a quote there at the time where she refers to Basson as evil, and I agree with the committee that when they say that Dr. Basson was there to serve people and not to kill them. We've seen it in the meantime. Other than this latest court case, he sort of made headlines here and there. There was this talk last year of him attending this public sort of discussion about stress that was happening sort of in the Hessequa area, and the Western Cape government had reshared that, Tammy, on Facebook. They had to delete the post again afterwards, and even the Premier's sort of department, comms there, had come out and said, no, we don't endorse this particular talk that had happened. Right. Now, what's expected to happen next year, Tammy, in the HPCSA's proceedings against Basson, which we've now found out, of course, the taxpayers' footing here?
I don't think it's the what will be happening. I think the more relevant question will be when it will be happening, because Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, in a recent response to a parliamentary question, said that the matter was set down to be heard before the new committee on the 19th and 20th of September 2024. So that was last year. It was later postponed to the 5th of December, but it couldn't proceed on that date as Dr. Basson's lawyers were waiting appointment by the state attorney still at the time. And then there were preliminary discussions between the parties on the 7th of February this year, but that is also where Dr. Basson's legal team informed the HPCSA lawyers of their intent to launch this current High Court application for the permanent stay of proceedings. So Dr. Basson was supposed to have pleaded to the charges on the 11th of April, but that's now on hold, obviously, as he launched this court application 2 days prior to that. So when the matter will be heard is still
anyone's guess.
Yeah, let's wait and see what happens with the court case, because obviously what happens in terms of the court case, if the court should decide that there should be, so if he should be successful in his application, there would be a permanent stay of disciplinary proceedings then against him.
Yeah, very complex. Us as the media, there's so many different cogs of this particular story that we need to stay on top of. It looks like at this stage, he's 74. He's claiming he doesn't remember much from around 40 years ago. It's going to be interesting to see how this sort of plays out. Tammy Petersen, thank you so much for your time on The Lead. I really do appreciate it, and for going through all the various historical research. And
thank you.
To our trending topic now, and police say they're still searching for former Transnet staffer Lucky Molefe. He's wanted for the apparent assassination of a Vereniging-based engineer. Armand Swart was shot and killed outside his work in April last year. According to our investigative journalist, Jeff Wicks, Swart's murder was a case of mistaken identity. It's understood Swart's death came just 2 weeks after his Vaal engineering company had uncovered that a simple spring that they were selling for around R3.20 had been resold to Transnet for around R152 per unit. The parastatal is said to have bought 8,000 of these springs to the tune of around 1.2 million rand. That's instead of what was meant to be 25,000 rand. 4 suspects, including the alleged hitman, one of them understood to be a former police detective, and the apparent mastermind behind this hit, have all been arrested, but Molefe, a key suspect, remains at large. News 24 understands that Molefe had played a major role in manipulating the procurement cost of the spring sale and arranged the hit after being questioned internally. Meanwhile, 2 of the arrested suspects have also been charged with the attempted hit on actress Tebogo Tobojane, the former lover of tender Don Vusi Musi Kat Matlala, who's since been arrested and accused of orchestrating the failed attempt on her life. Ever wondered what goes on in the minds of some of South Africa's most terrifying serial killers? Well, this month's free audiobook, only for News 24 subscribers, is Killer Stories, Conversations with South African Serial Murderers by Brian Hodgkiss and Nicole Engelbrecht. Here's a snippet narrated by Gavin Gomez.
It is sometimes the case with serial murderers that those hunting them are not aware of their serial nature until arrests are made. In several cases, it has been one offense that has led to the arrest, and then the offender himself will admit to many more murders. This is one such instance. On the eve of the dawning of the new South Africa in 1990s, the body of a homeless child called Sam was found at a primary school.
And finally, disgraced R&B singer R. Kelly is now pushing for an early release from prison on house arrest. That's amid claims that a fellow inmate, a neo-Nazi, had been instructed to kill him. The artist, whose real name is Robert Kelly, is currently serving a 30-year term in a North Carolina prison for sex trafficking and federal racketeering involving minors. But R. Kelly's attorney has since filed papers claiming his client's life is now at risk. That's after a fellow inmate, Mikhail Stein, came forward alleging that 3 officials from the US Bureau of Prisons asked him to kill Kelly. Stein, who's said to belong to the Aryan Brotherhood, a violent white supremacist prison gang, claims that he was actually moved from an Arizona facility to Kelly's prison unit. Stein, who's suffering from terminal cancer, claims that he was promised his freedom in exchange for Kelly's life. Instead, he says he suddenly had a change of heart. Earlier this year, Kelly tried to appeal his sentences, claiming the US courts used insufficient evidence. However, his legal team failed. From calls for accountability over alleged apartheid-era crimes to a Transnet-linked hit, South Africa's story is always complex, and we as the media are doing our utmost to make sense of it all and bring these stories to you. Well, since we've launched our hotline for the lead, getting some of your voice notes, we've received quite a few this week. For Monday's show, meet the Josie broker who had disappeared with millions from friends, family and clients. We spoke to business journalist Jan Krenier about Johannesburg-based investment broker Mark Kretschmer. He's been described by his clients, those who knew him, as an apparent smooth talker who had plied them with fantastic food and drink, convincing many into handing over their precious millions. But then, since then, he's gone missing after taking some 30 million rand. A lot of these clients are now wondering where their investments have gone. We've received quite a few voice notes from you. Let's have a listen to some of them.
Good evening. It is really sad. I had a similar experience back in 2023 in May when I was scammed my last money of my UIF. Somebody promised a huge returns, and then I lost my money. It's banned from Rustenburg in near Sun City.
I wonder how such people manage to flee with such huge amounts of money without being detected. How does it happen that people just run away with money without being detected?
Yeah, I feel very sorry for the people who've got their funds that disappeared funds to this guy who ran away with their money. It's very painful indeed, because people invested thinking that tomorrow it's going to be easier and a better way, but now someone runs away with their funds. It's very terrible. I can imagine the pain they are going through, but I hope the law can take its course.
Thank you so much for all your voice notes. I really do appreciate it there. And then we had Tuesday's edition, the Bloody Diamond War in Namakwaland, with senior investigative journalist Jacques Poe. He was telling us about how that specific region of the Northern Cape has essentially fallen prey to thousands of illicit diamond miners over the last couple of years. Some really fantastic investigative work there. We got a couple of voice notes there as well. As you waded into the conversation, let's listen to some of them now.
Referring to this story, have there been any arrests? Is there any likelihood of arrests? At what point are we going to finally see who the kingpins are and what they do with the proceeds of this type of illegal mining?
Police, they have to take all those guys out of that such bloodsuckers, because they are getting nuts, such as the place called Port Noloth, where I was there once. I was nearly die for nothing. So please, just take a control, please.
I'm sure you are aware that the illicit diamond trading in the Northern Cape resulted in the hijacking of the only South African Airways aircraft ever to be hijacked. This happened because De Beers refused to pay private diamond detective Fred Camille his commission for having solved many cases. Harry Oppenheimer eventually paid him a very large sum of money. I'm Jopi Niemann, one of the crew on board of that Boeing 727 during the drama in 1972. And I subsequently became very good friends with Camille, who shared a lot of inside information with me.
Sure, that sounds like definitely a story to follow up there. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really do appreciate it. It just shows you Jacques Pauw's work there in that region is not done yet. So many fascinating stories come out of the woodwork. Okay, thank you so much for all your voice notes. I really do appreciate it. Keep them coming. You know exactly how to get hold of us. Of course, you can send a mail if you like, thelead@24.com. But our official hotline now, where you can send more of your voice notes, is 072 562 3179. That's 072 562 3179. We really appreciate all your engagement thus far. It's been an action-packed show. You know, as I always say, my name's Graham Robenheimer. So long as there's news, we'll have the lead.